What is a weird fact you know about nuclear bombs? Story 1: 54% of the U.S.'s deterrent nuclear weapons are on board nuclear-powered submarines capable of prowling the ocean for 70 days at a time, their exact locations known only to their crews. Their mission is to remain hidden so as to assure second-strike retaliatory capability. Edit. Of course, these subs can go more than 70 days deployed. They're nuclear. They are typically commissioned with enough uranium to power them for 20 to 30 years. They can be resupplied at sea for various crew requirements if really necessary. Story 2. The first one, or maybe the first two, was referred to simply as the gadget. An underground nuclear bomb test is thought by some to be responsible for the fastest-moving man-made object in history, a manhole cover. It was used to cover the hole down which the bomb was lowered, and a high-speed camera was trained on it because there was the expectation that it would bugger off very quickly. The camera captured only one frame with the lid in it post-explosion. Calculations are very rough, but if accurate, the lid far exceeded escape velocity, reaching a speed higher than even any spacecraft or probe yet launched. And if it survived intact, it will right now be whizzing through space at a ridiculous pace. Story 3. Once the chain reaction with the uranium is initiated, neutrons bounce around inside the device, triggering more atoms to release their energy. Early designs exploded before much of the nuclear material had even been triggered, leading to wasted uranium and smaller explosions. The most effective designs contain this chain reaction for as long as possible, like a pressure cooker to maximize the size of the explosion. Story 4. Operation Crossroads. After the iconic Baker shot, Bikini Lagoon was heavily irradiated, as the bomb was detonated underwater. To show how irradiated the water was, Army General Stafford Warren caught a fish from the lagoon and used it to expose an X-ray image of itself on a piece of film. The fish experiment, and subsequent scientific instrument readings of the radiation, led to the eventual cancellation of the third planned test that was supposed to happen. Story 5. Oh boy, this question was made for me. I love studying the technology behind nuclear bombs. Here are a few fun facts. The energy released from fission and fusion bombs is exponential. If you can keep the materials together for 1/1000th of a second longer, you'll have 50% more yield. At some point, it's just easier to pad the bomb with anything heavy, like lead or more uranium. The bomb design that was dropped on Hiroshima was never tested. The first nuclear bomb detonated was the design that was dropped on Nagasaki. The plutonium that is used in fission bombs has to be manufactured. There is no plutonium ore that can be found on Earth. This is done with a breeder reactor. Photos of the first ever nuclear detonation show a fireball in the shape of a sphere with long spindles like tentacles coming off of it. Those spindles are the tower's steel wires being vaporized by the amount of X-rays emitted from the bomb. The destination of a nuclear bomb is closely followed by rain, as the heat from the bomb pulls moisture into the upper atmosphere where it cools, and then rains. Do not drink the rain. Most immediate radiation deaths from Hiroshima are from people drinking the rain in a desperate attempt to get water. Story 6. If there is a direct nuclear impact called for your location, a bunker is useless. Depending on the load, a bunker is only useful for those in the fallout zone, not the direct impact zone. Also, radiation is carried on the wind, which is what creates such a large fallout zone, but it settles in the soil, which is what restricts people to the bunkers for such a long time. Edit. Oh, and also, even when you can safely come to the surface, you can't eat any food grown from that soil, or drink any water from the surface. The radiation that sticks around the longest can't penetrate human skin, but it's a different story if you ingest it. Any crops grown above ground would be contaminated. I can't remember how long it sticks around off the top of my head. Story 7. Back when the UK nuclear weapons program hadn't quite figured out the whole hydrogen bomb thing, weapons designers came up with an interim solution by building a really big atom bomb that didn't use any hydrogen, just a ton of uranium. While it's perfectly possible to make an atomic bomb as powerful as a small hydrogen bomb, it wasn't done very much during the Cold War because it was super-duper dangerous and expensive. Nevertheless, they really wanted a big bomb, so they went ahead anyway. So the danger was that the 70-kilogram hollow ball of uranium inside the bomb was highly unstable and could get dented or flattened in an accident, which would have made it explode. Normal atom bombs have a much smaller mass of uranium, which is much harder to explode accidentally. The solution was to fill the hollow ball with steel balls, 133,000 of them. The bomb was armed by pulling a plug and pouring the balls into a tub, then made safe by pouring them back in. On one occasion, the plug fell out of one of the bombs and the hangar floor where it was stored became covered with 133,000 steel balls and a single 400-kiloton Grumpy atom bomb. The bomb was not popular with British pilots. Eventually, Britain figured out how to build hydrogen bombs, and the green grass bomb was quickly retired. Britain also built a chicken-powered nuclear landmine, but that's a different story. Story 8. Britain's nuclear warheads are moved between Fastlane Naval Base and the Atomic Weapons Establishment in Aldermaston in big green articulated lorries and convoys. A convoy contains between 2 and 5 lorries. They are accompanied by MOD police and Royal Marines both covertly and overtly. A breakdown lorry, a rolling command center that looks like a passenger coach, and a variety of other stuff. Each lorry has a driver and a Royal Marine, both armed. Each convoy contains at least one decoy, empty lorry. The lorry cabs can only be opened from the inside, or from outside with a code. The cabs are made by Mercedes-Benz trucks, but they carry no badges as they don't want to be associated with the weapons. With a warhead on board, and all the associated shielding, the lorries are far heavier than is normally legally permitted, and the axle configurations are technically illegal, but the whole thing is run under Crown prerogative by the MOD. This also exempts them from the need for tachographs, driver's hours regulations, and the need for speed limiters. Story 9. If you live in a city with a major university, military base, manufacturing hub, or major economic structure, there is already a nuke aimed at you right now. The nuke is also von Neumann's architecture, just like everything else. The explosion of a hydrogen bomb is actually 2 nuclear bombs in one, and requires that enough radiation from the explosion of the first bomb actually reaches the second bomb to ignite it before the blast does and destroys it. The tolerances are insane. During one of the first nuclear test explosions at Los Alamos, a young Richard Feynman was enthusiastically playing his bongos as the bomb went off. It's a trippy mental picture. Story 10. Each new British Prime Minister writes a note to each nuclear missile-equipped submarine commander and puts it in a safe on the sub. In the event, the UK is nuked and the Prime Minister dies, the sub-commander opens the safe and reads the instructions. Presumably, the instructions tell the sub-commander whether to fully retaliate and kill millions of innocent people, launch limited nukes against enemy military sites, or maybe even do nothing. When the Prime Minister leaves office, the letters are destroyed, unread. The idea is that the UK might retaliate if it is nuked. This possibility is enough of a nuclear deterrent to hopefully prevent the UK from being nuked. But in reality, the UK may not retaliate because if the UK is gone from nukes, what's the point after the fact of wiping out even more people with more nukes? Story 11. Launching a nuclear bomb, at least in the USA, isn't as easy as the president pushing a simple button or making a general order to do so. In the event that we launch a nuclear weapon in a direct attack against another country, the president gives the initial command, which is then passed down through several levels of military clearance before eventually reaching the actual silo that is to launch the ICBM containing the warhead, and even then it will have to go through a 2-key process system before it goes live and can be launched. Much of the precautions were put in place because back in the 70s, former President Richard Nixon got drunk and attempted to launch a nuclear attack on North Korea, to which the VP at the time halted the situation, telling everyone involved to let him sleep it off. Since then, we have taken a lot more precautions when it comes to launching nuclear weapons. Story 12. When people say thermonuclear war would end life on Earth, they aren't necessarily referring to the explosions themselves. In the event of nuclear winter, there would be no sunlight for 1 to 2 years. Nearly every plant on the surface would die, as would nearly every animal shortly thereafter as the food chain collapsed. Whole forests would become dead wood, and fuel massive fires the moment lightning started hitting. The smoke and ash from the world's collective forests burning would extend nuclear winter by years, while also consuming massive amounts of oxygen with no plant life left to replenish it. Deep undersea life or cave organisms would be the only thing left to enjoy the poisonous atmosphere of our irradiated wasteland. It would be a waking nightmare. Story 13. I just did some math. The largest nuclear weapon in the active U.S. arsenal is the B-83, with a yield of 1.2 megatons. According to its description, it would disintegrate anything in a 1.04-kilometer radius, moderately damage buildings, kill most individuals within 7.47 kilometers, and cause third-degree burns to anyone outside within 13.2 kilometers. At the peak of the Cold War, there were about 7,300 nuclear devices of various yields. If we assume that all those nukes are B-83s, an overestimate, that everything inside the thermal radiation radius of 13.2 kilometers is completely destroyed, also an overestimate. and that all the devices detonated with no overlap, then the total land area destroyed would be nearly 38.5 million square kilometers, or 25.6% of the land area of the Earth, or 7.5% of the total surface area. Today, there are only 13,790, still too many, nuclear devices. With the same assumptions, would destroy a mere 5.1% of land area, or 1.5% of total surface area. Even if we assume all the bombs were the 50-megaton Tsar Bomba, the biggest bomb ever tested, the current inventory of 13,190 bombs would only just destroy all the land area of the Earth, 104.7% of land area, only 30% of the total surface area. Story 14. Project Orion was a program developed in the early 60s. It was meant to determine how effective what's called a nuclear pulse propulsion spaceship would work. The answer? Surprisingly well. This technology is, to my knowledge, the only currently understood and feasible way to launch a heavy lift ship from Earth to orbit, and then get to Jupiter in 6 months. Concerns were expressed for the fallout potential, but the yield of nuke used would be roughly 0.5 kiloton, and if used at, say, the Great North of Canada, as close to magnetic north as we can get, only 100 miles, would have mild radiation. Physicist Freeman Dyson actually published a report showing the limited ecological damage caused by this launch method. The program was stopped in its tracks by both Kennedy when seeing a proposed Orion battleship model, and civilian research stopped by the MAD Treaty preventing in-flight testing of nuclear weapons. Story 15. I watched a video today about the Demon Core. Basically, it was the nuclear core for the intended Third Japan bombing, but Japan surrendered before the bomb was ever used. The nuclear core was then sent to a lab for experimentation. Some of those involved in studying the bomb's fusion. Mainly, they wanted to know at what point the fusion would actually cause a catastrophic release of radiation. This involved bringing the core to a near point of detonation without actually detonating it. It wouldn't explode like this, but it would release massive waves of intense radiation if it did reach that critical fusion point. 2 scientists died by accidentally triggering mass fusion. The first, a structure of lead brick, fell on top, giving enough energy for a reaction. The person died a month later. The second was doing a similar experiment, this time with a metal casing instead of lead bricks. A similar thing happened where the top of the casing fell shut, keeping radiation from escaping, and, in turn, triggering a massive fusion reaction. This scientist died from radiation sickness a mere 9 days later. Story 16. Unlike typical explosive weapons, nuclear bombs are not triggered by impact. The material housed in the warhead is stable and requires more than a simple spark for the explosive reaction to be initiated. Instead, a mechanism is triggered to fire a neutron, or multiple, at the radioactive payload in order to split an atom, sending more neutrons flying to hit other atoms in the payload and setting off a chain reaction. The explosion is also triggered above the target and not at ground level to be able to impact a wider area with the initial shockwave. If that mechanism failed to trigger, the bomb would just fall to the ground and likely become damaged beyond the point where the payload could be triggered to explode. Story 17. The post-World War II British Blue Danube nuclear bomb was so secret that a museum was using a dummy nuke they found in a hedge as a parking bollard until the late 2000s, as they knew it had something to do with the RAF, but they had no idea what. They found out it was a true-to-weight, true-to-size concrete dummy of the British post-World War II nuclear bomb, used for payload tests in aircraft, with all the correct slots, etc., for people inserting detonators, etc. When they found out, they panicked, and quickly got experts thinking it might still contain nuclear material. But it didn't. It is also believed now to be unique, as no others have been found. Story 18. A Russian radio controller stopped all-out nuclear war during the Cold War. Nuclear fission and fusion are completely different. Theoretically, a fusion reactor would be inherently safe with little to no waste. Fission reactors have spent nuclear material that has a very long shelf life. Fusion reactions are the sun. Fission is the bomb. Could be way off. Been a decade or two since I researched it. Edit. The Tsar Nicholas bomb was the largest nuclear bomb ever detonated. So large that it's believed to have tilted the Earth's axis. Again, been a while, so that could be wrong. Story 19. I was a bartender at a hotel for a long while and had a group of electricians and technicians stay for a few weeks. They talked about how they were upgrading some telecommunication systems in the silos, and that it was all classified. But one guy was telling a story about how they were always escorted to and away from the sites. He'd left a tool at one the previous day, and decided to just pop back quickly to get it that evening. Now, western Nebraska is very flat. It was a quiet summer evening, corn all around, not another person on site. The dude pulls up in his truck and gets out. sees the gate locked, looks at the fence for a minute to see if there's a way to get his tool, and hears engines. He turns around to his truck and there's a chopper on the horizon, and plumes of dust coming from both directions on the road. He knows he's messed up. The dude drops to his knees and puts his hands on his head and starts praying. Before he gets halfway through his first Our Father, there's a helicopter overhead with a spotlight on him and 3 Humvees turrets pointed at him with a half-dozen soldiers on foot. After interrogation, verification of his story, and one hell of an ass chewing, they gave him the tool back and sent him on his way. That was the same night he sat at my bar till closing, drowning his sorrows because he was headed home the next day. No way his former company was going to let him jeopardize the military contract. Story 20. The amount of energy they produce comes from a remarkably small amount of material. Fat Man, which was a very inefficient nuclear weapon by modern standards, produced a 21 kiloton explosion, equivalent to the yield of 21,000 tons of TNT, from just 65 grams of material, about 1% of what was actually in the bomb itself. That's roughly equivalent to the mass of 1.5 golf balls or 5 AA batteries. It's kind of mind-boggling how much energy-splitting atoms actually produce. Story 21. Their blast radius is the cube root of their power, so it's not actually that large. Only the largest could take out Manhattan Island. Modern ICBM warheads have a blast radius of roughly a mile. The damage falls off so fast that if there is a 1-mile radius, reinforced concrete will be destroyed. There is about a 2-mile radius where most injuries will be from windows being blown out. Fallout is divided into 3 types of radiation. The stronger, the faster it decays. Gamma is the only one strong enough to cause radiation poisoning. Within the first hour, you can receive a lethal dosage, especially when compounded with injuries. It takes 2 feet of concrete to reduce it by 99.9%. 6 inches will only reduce it by 80%, which could still save your life, but you'll get cancer later if you live. A car or normal building won't do much. No practical suit can protect you. After 7 hours, 90% had gone away. 99% after 2 days. 99.9% after 2 weeks. Beta radiation can linger for a while, but normal clothing will stop it. Alpha radiation will only hurt you if eaten, but can linger in soil for decades. It's believed most of the deaths from a small nuclear war between India and Pakistan would be from people refusing to eat any food grown there, resulting in potentially billions dying from famine. A single nuclear submarine has enough nuclear ordnance to kill 100 million people in about an hour. They don't actually explode. They get so hot they vaporize the surrounding matter so violently it explodes. This heats lithium salts so hot the lithium molecules hit each other with enough force to fuse. Hydrogen isn't used because it's so light you wouldn't fit much in. The quote, "I have become death, destroyer of worlds," was thought by Oppenheimer, because he realized what he had helped do was so monumental, all of human history could be divided into before and after. Everything on Earth made after that day has isotopes that nothing before the day has. This can be used to identify if the wine of very old vintages is authentic. Every human on Earth has nuclear fallout in them. Every tree, every blade of grass. And from that day on, humans use the ability to end the world like never before. A global nuclear war would cause billions of deaths, but humanity would rebuild. It would likely be the most prolific collapse in all of human history. However, not bomb-related. But Chernobyl wasn't actually that bad. Everyone known to die died from gamma radiation exposure. Lingering alpha or beta exposure causes a small increase in cancer risk to millions of people surrounding it, leading to further deaths. At the time, the Soviet Union was weakening, so they built it into a huge disaster to use fear to control the populace. Story 22. The critical mass, required for a boom of the nuclear core in a bomb, isn't a critical mass at normal pressure. Conventional explosives surround the nuclear material and explode first, squeezing the nuclear core at extreme pressure, turning it from non-critical, won't explode, to critical, boom, all in tiny fractions of a second when triggered. The science of shaped charge explosives, the conventional explosive skin, and explosive lensing, directing the explosive shock wave, is a much more difficult part of the design than anything in the nuclear part of the design. Story 23. I visited Hiroshima in 2001. Everyone there swears you can still feel the radiation, and I thought it was a crock. Before I even got to the city properly, I felt weird. The entire duration, my skin felt a weird, faint, needle-like sensation. It stopped when we left the city again. I don't know what the hell it was exactly, but we all felt the same thing. There were like 20 of us. It was super freaky. Oh, by the way, the people in Japan view the bombing of Hiroshima very differently than Americans. Their history museums have drastically different information from American history books. Story 24. The likely first maneuver in a true full-scale attack would be Russian submarine-launched ballistic missiles detonating in high orbit in an attempt to knock out the U.S. electrical grid. From that point, you have about 15 minutes before the intercontinental ballistic missiles start landing. And most of those use the shotgun approach with 500 kiloton warheads versus the larger 20 megaton warhead that would probably be reserved for the Minuteman missile fields and 7,000-foot runways. After the ICBMs, you would likely have bombers coming to clean up any misses. Despite all of this, many millions of Americans would survive the attack and need to step up to prevent mass starvation and potentially repel a land invasion if we were really goddamn unlucky. Source: Nuclear Warfare Survival Skills, Story 25. The concept of a dirty bomb is honestly as scary as a full nuclear weapon. It's basically a bundle of radioactive material tied to a regular bomb, aimed to spread as much radiation as possible to an area. The scary part is that it's a relatively easy bomb to manufacture. Of course, radioactive materials are controlled, but they are present in many places in civilian life, such as X-ray machines of many kinds. A terrible accident with one of such machines happened in Brazil in the 70s with cesium-137, because the machine was abandoned within an old hospital. It's not inconceivable that a driven individual could procure such materials and basically make a city as large as New York uninhabitable for the foreseeable future. Story 26. The Trident II D5 ballistic missile uses the stars for navigation, and when they are launched from a nuclear submarine, they never actually touch water. There are also emergency procedures on the submarine due to the damage that will be caused by launching them, and the crew is pretty much resigned to the fact that if the boat ever fired one in anger, they would all probably die. Story 27, Project Seesaw, in which Nicholas Christofilis proposed to drain the Great Lakes in 15 minutes in order to power a massive missile defense system, was not looked upon as crazy and unthinkable, only too expensive. Reminds me of the idea of mounting thousands of rockets to the Earth pointing in one direction and slowing the rotation of the Earth just a tiny bit momentarily and causing the guidance systems of everything that was launched to be incorrect. It's from a book. I can't remember which I read without research. I do know it was something at least considered at one point, lol, just not that seriously. Story 28. For devices with solid pits or thick-walled hollow pits, spatial implosion symmetry comes absurdly easy. The Trinity gadget Fat Man didn't even need baritol explosive wave shaping to work. It's actually possible to build a working bomb out of a 55-gallon steel drum with only 2 equal lengths of normal record as explosive synchronization and 2 wave shapers made from stacked plywood discs. As the detonation waves are forced to go around the discs, they go from being expanding spheres to being expanding torus, donut shapes. A solid ball of fuel-grade plutonium and a thick brass shell suspended in the center of the drum, equidistant between the plywood spacers, is all it would take.